All right, so we're going to go over how you stain and then top coat the wood. You could also use a paint over stain. Some of the reasons you may consider a paint rather than a stain when finishing wood is if your wood grain isn't as attractive or you have significant surface defects. That may apply. Some woods don't have the most beautiful wood grain. Pine's a good example of a wood that while it does take stain well, it can sometimes not have the most beautiful grain appearance and can be a little more challenging with stain. When it comes to stain, you have two primary categories and then a third category that's kind of in and of itself. You have pigment stain and dye stain. Most stains are a mixture of the two, but the important thing is that the pigment in stain is what gives you highlight of differences between wood grain and the rest of the wood itself. It'll highlight areas darker and then the other areas will appear lighter. Dye stain tends to tone the entire portion of the wood or the entire overall appearance of the wood, and it gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to darkening or lightening. You can lighten a dye stain by applying the proper thinner that was used to mix the material, which will give you a lot of forgiveness if you over darken it to a state that you don't like, and that can be done before you apply a top coat. Dye stain also tends to color the entire wood evenly. So the mixture of the two will vary greatly depending on the individual product you're using, but just remember that pigment also obscures the wood underneath. So if you're looking to hide imperfections, a higher pigment in your stain can help do that slightly. You also have what's called a gel stain, and a gel stain tends to act much like a paint, and instead of absorbing into the pores of the wood, tends to cover the wood. This can be helpful for hiding blemishes, hiding wood tone that you don't think looks very attractive, or if you're working with a wood that tends to have an unforgiving grain when it comes to being stained. Again, pine being an example that can work really well with a gel stain. All right, so after we've prepped the wood with sanding it properly down to about 220 grit, taking steps from 60 up to 220, and you are ready for stain, you want to make sure your wood is free of any dust. You can use a tack cloth, a vacuum, or blow it down, as well as use a solvent wipe like mineral spirits. We'll blow this down and solvent wipe. You want to blow around the work area, make sure your part's completely free of any dust. Because your dust will show up in your finish. So once we get it blown down, we want to make sure it feels smooth. We're going to go ahead and apply the first coat of stain, then we'll wipe it. You can do multiple coats to get to the darkness that you prefer, but you do typically want to spray it and wipe it so that you don't get pooling or excess buildup, which can ultimately result in the stain not being easy to top coat well. So we'll go ahead and spray it. I am using what's known as a D-cup system. This allows me to quickly change this in my top coat. Between my sealer and top coat, this plugs into my gravity gun, and then there's a liner in here that's disposable. So it makes it easy to switch between the two. And before we apply a top coat, we want to make sure the stain's completely dry. And you do typically you need to use lint-free rags, both to wipe down the part, tack cloths for wiping down the part, and then for removing excess stain, you want to use a lint-free rag or a wiping sponge for stain that has no lint or any contaminant in it, because that ultimately will show in your finish. So we'll go ahead and spray this down and wipe it off. You typically just want to spray it, leave it for a while. The longer it dwells on the surface of your product, the darker each stain will appear. There will become a point where subsequent coats will relatively make no change if you're using a primarily dye-based stain, pigment-based stain. With dye stain, you can continue to darken it. If you need to lighten it, we'll show you how to do that. You can use some solvent to achieve that. But we'll go ahead and stain this. All right, so we'll go ahead and spray it down. You usually want to do a test pass. Make sure the stain looks relatively atomized and that your pattern's nice and open. So you can see there, you're getting good breakup. So it should apply well. We'll go ahead and apply it to the wood and then wipe it off. I like spraying because you don't get brush marks in your finish and you don't have those issues to contend with. There's a little more to learn, but our training on spray guns can help with that. So your gun, you need to hold about 6 to 8 inches from the surface, and you want to move directly over the wood. And you want to make sure that the whole product has been relatively equally coated. So I'll leave that sit for a few moments here, and then we'll go ahead and wipe it down. I have a stain wiping sponge. These are lint-free and make wiping a lot easier. We're just simply going to move in the direction of the grain and remove the excess stain that's been left on the surface. You can kind of go up and down the part a few times to properly remove the excess. A big part of how your stain looks will end up being the type of wood you work with in the beginning. Some woods tend to do well with stain. If you wanted this to hide the lines or the grain of the wood thoroughly, you can use a top coat to start to apply first and then apply the stain on top. And what that does is that hides the pores from accepting as much stain, so you tend to get a little more of a concealed look. We'll actually show that to you down at the end here of this board. Okay, so I've wiped it down. I'll let this thoroughly dry before I apply a top coat and sand it. If you don't let it dry before you apply your top coat, you can have issues with a gray mottling appearance, and that's typically because your stain was still wet. But we'll go ahead and get this dried, and then I may do a few more coats to darken it a little more for my own taste, and apply your top coat and then sand it, and that's to remove any grain that's been raised. So before we apply the top coat, we're going to go over the options you have with film forming finishes. If you don't use a film forming finish, you're looking at a penetrating finish like a tung oil or linseed oil. These tend not to offer the same level of resistance against acid or heat, so we typically don't finish our wood projects with those. Your other finishes for film forming finishes include options like varnish, lacquer, and shellac. Shellac tends to be very good for repair work. It doesn't resist heat and moisture as well, but it doesn't tend to yellow over time as either. It can also be a great wash coat or initial sealer for your woodwork, as it is very effective at that. Lacquer is very forgiving with atmospheric conditions and changes because of the high solvent content, but given its high solvent content, that tends to be a downside for lacquer. It's also very durable and tends to protect relatively well against heat and a variety of conditions. Varnishes tend to be one of the most durable of the coatings, and they're offered in pre or post-catalyzed options. If you get a post-catalyzed varnish, you have to add the actual accelerator that allows the varnish to cure. Those tend to be the most durable of either pre or post-catalyzed, but it does add one step to your finish. We're using a post-catalyzed varnish in this demonstration, It's a Becca Chroma clear catalyzed varnish from Clark Deco Moldings. And the varnish tends not to yellow and offers the most durability, and is one of our favorites to go with for most projects. You can get a lot of your film finishes in water-based as well. Main benefit there, you don't have the VOC content. It is safer for the environment, but they oftentimes can be slower drying compared to an oil-based or solvent-based product. So we'll show you how to apply them now that you know a little bit about the pros and cons of each. Also, you can use any of your top coat sealer to seal after you've applied your initial stain, or to use as a wash coat. And as a wash coat, you're basically locking the wood from any further penetration of your stain. So when you apply your stain, you'll see that it tends to sit on top of that wash coat, and that creates darker coloration and obscures the underlying wood a little further. That can be helpful, again, as an option if you're trying to hide something under the surface that wasn't as pretty as you hoped while you're doing your project, or your wood doesn't have the best grain appearance to it. So in my case, I'm using a D-cups. It allows for quick change. It has an internal liner that you can throw away. And if you had two of these adapters and then the D-cup, you can easily switch between your stain and your top coat, making it a lot easier and almost cleanup non-existent. You can just run a little thinner through there, not worry about the cup liner or the cup itself to be cleaned. You can just throw the liner out and switch between your materials, your coats, your colors quickly. You do want to test, make sure you're getting good breakup. I can see there I am. Looks nice and fine. So we'll lay down the top coat across the whole board. You 6 to 8 inches away and move uniformly across the wood. You do want to make sure you apply enough that the wood is, you can visibly see the material on the wood. And you can see I've gotten it across the whole board. We'll let that dry, then we'll come back, sand it, and continue on with our next coat of sealer until we get in sanding in between the next coat. Your final coat of sealer you don't sand, you'll just leave it applied as it is. So after each top coat application, you need to lightly scuff the surface, and that's to allow the next coat to adhere well. The only coat you will not do that on is your very last coat of top finish. The sanding will help also on the first coat that you apply, which is a little extra thinned, to take away any raised grain. And when we're doing it, we're looking to just barely scuff the finish that's there. So you don't want to really remove too much of the top, just kind of roughening it up. You can see there how my finish starts to turn a little darker, or a little lighter I should say, than the original after the top coat's been applied. And that's about what you want. You don't want to remove any of the stain. I prefer to do this by hand so I don't overly sand and take away any of the finish. When it starts to lighten, as you can see there, that's when you know you've done just about enough. And you'll do that down the whole board, and then you can apply as many layers as you want. I find 2 to 3 usually to be adequate, and in between each layer you do want to allow sufficient time to dry so that you're sanding and creating a rough surface. And you do want to remove any dust that might have accumulated in between. You can do that with a blowgun, a vacuum, or a tack cloth. Okay, so once it's sanded, we'll go ahead and apply another layer. So this is our finished product. As you can see as we go down the surface, it's very smooth. That's due to good prep work. And there's no raised grain. That's due to properly sanding after your first seal coat. And then it's a very smooth and hard finish that you can feel. And that's
due to using conversion varnish plus scuffing in between coats.